Stefan, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Thank you.
So it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this webinar of the REN Alliance. The REN Alliance, the International Renewable Energy Alliance, which is an alliance of the 5 renewable energy organizations which work on the global level: the International Geothermal Association, the International Hydropower Association, the International Solar Energy Society, the World Bioenergy Association, and the World Wind Energy Association. We have the pleasure to welcome you to this webinar, which is about a new momentum for climate change mitigation, renewables working together. And it's a great pleasure that we have 3 expert speakers here with us today representing the key international organizations dealing with the transformation of the global energy supply system. Now, before we start this webinar, I would like to just inform you about a few important things. One is that this is a public event, so it is recorded and it's also broadcasted live on YouTube. So please, if you do not want that your face is visible in the general public, then please be aware of that. And if you raise a topic, if you have any questions, please also be aware that this is public. Those who have questions, I would request you to write your question into the chat window and we will come back to that. And if time allows, we will also then ask you to speak. Unless you are requested to speak, I would also request everyone to stay muted so that there is no disturbing sound and noise in the background. With this, I have the pleasure to invite Honorable Peter Ray. Peter, you are the president of the World Wind Energy Association. You are the honorary chairman of our REN Alliance. You have had many positions in renewable energy, including as the chairman in the past of Hydro Tasmania. You really have the practical experience also of how to deal with renewable energy implementation, and it's my pleasure to welcome you and ask you to welcome our participants.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Thank you for the opportunity to welcome those who are participating by speaking, those who are participating by listening. I hope everybody concludes this session feeling that it was a very worthwhile occasion. And it takes me back to a little bit of the history of what we're going to be talking about. And I think that those who were privileged to join in the 2004 Bonn conference saw one of the great events in world history. And it's got a special significance for, I think, 2 of the parties which will be talking today. One of them is the REN Alliance, which was formed at the time of the Bonn conference and immediately after it, with the inaugural 3 members of solar, wind and hydro, and then later on joined by bioenergy and geothermal. The recognition at the Bonn conference is that not only was there a problem, but there was a solution, that there was a way to go forward together as part of the world, taking action to overcome the problems of climate change, the problems of sustainability of the world, and the creation of a world which was a better place for the rapidly increasing population to gather and to experience. It was an example of the old saying that united we stand and divided we fall. Out of that conference came the desire to work together, and 154 nations of the world joined in the declaration which flowed from that. Since 2004, we've seen the creation, as a part of the recommendations from the Bonn conference, was the formation of an organisation which is now known as REN 21. And the REN 21 organisation has had a dramatic impact on providing information, statistics and ideas to the interested world, and the interested world has grown very significantly since REN 21 was formed in, well, really we got it going in 2005. the statistics show the tremendous growth that has taken place in the renewable energy world. And then we have not only REN 21, but the IEA, which is, has a long history, but has been taking an increasing interest in renewable energy as part of the energy scene. And that's a warm welcome to the IEA participating in this webinar. And then we have IRENA. IRENA took a little while to get going. It wasn't for some years that it was successfully negotiated, but it was negotiated, it was established, and now it has over 160 countries which have joined, and a number of others who are in the process of joining. So we've got those three organisations plus the REN Alliance, which can all date back to that meeting in Bonn in 2004. The concept of a sustainable world is something which had been floating around, people starting to become more and more concerned about it. The Club of Rome started some great interest, but others were involved, and we had a recognition that sustainability of the world is something which we needed to have. The world population has trebled in my lifetime. And that's some indication of just how massive has been the change that has taken place in the world, and how important it is that not only can we find ways in relation to energy, but the other things in life of being able to service a population with a world which has suffered as a result of failing to cater for the heavy demand on resources. And so the concept of a sustainable world is something which we'll be hearing about in various ways in this webinar. I'd like to just add one thing to that, and that is that I've been one of the international jury for the Energy Globe Awards. And in that capacity, I see a large number of the entries that people put in for ways in which you can make a more sustainable world. I think a bringing together of those who are involved in renewable energy and those who are involved in the variety of ways in which we can make a sustainable world could well get together and have a webinar in which the sustainability of the world and renewable energy's contribution would be one of the matters discussed. So with those words, let me welcome all of those who are participating, welcome those who are going to be speaking, and over to you, Stefan, to introduce the first speaker. Thank you very much for the opportunity. May you all find ways to be able to develop a renewable world in a faster speed, because that's the challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peter. Now it's indeed time for our first official speech, and it's my pleasure to welcome Rana Adib here, joining us from Paris. Rana, you're Executive Secretary of the REN 21, the Global Policy Network for the 21st Century, which is a very broad network of mainly non-governmental stakeholders. And one of the main products of the outcomes of your work is the Global Status Report. And I must say that I'm very pleased. We as World Wind Energy Association are, of course, a member like all the other REN Alliance partners. We've been able to contribute to this important publication. You just published it, I think it was around 2 weeks ago, giving an update of where renewables stand globally, where there is some positive signs, but also you, I think, have something to tell us about where we have to become better. And I look forward now to hearing from you firsthand. It's a great pleasure having you here with us on board. Rana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stefan, and thanks a lot to Peter also for introducing or going back into history and the beginnings of REN 21, I guess. Stefan, could you confirm if you can see my slides, please? Yes? Okay, good. So as Stefan said, we're a broad network, and I think this is This is something I would like to underline. So it is not only non-governmental players, to be honest. So REN is a global community of players from science and academia, NGOs, indeed, as Stefan mentioned, industry, but also governments, represented directly by governments, but also intergovernmental organizations. And for instance, IEA and IRENA are part of REN and are even part of the REN Bureau. What makes REN special, I guess, is this messiness of many players working together, but with different perspectives, but which are clearly also allowing us to tap into decentralized intelligence and create crowdsourced data and knowledge that creates an ownership and an opportunity for different perspectives working together and bridging different perspectives. So we have approximately 90 members, but a community of 2,000 members. And we're very much using basically, so building on the community, we produce this knowledge and data with the objective to inform and influence decision makers to advance renewable energy now. This renewables now has really been added recently to underline the urgency. I think what is important to mention, maybe since we are going back into history, historically, REN has very much started its work and also the analysis from the supply side. Today, it is very clear that it's about moving to an efficient and renewable-based energy system and ultimately an economy and society. Now, before going into the global status report results, I think it's really important to frame the discussion and say, like, norms can evolve. And I think this is really what we all need to work towards to, making the norm evolve and make renewable energy mainstream. So recently we have seen, and I see Paula, so you'll hear more about this. We have seen that many players are actually participating in making the norms evolve, and that norms are also evolving on some player side. So with the IEA net zero scenario, I'd say like maybe not the first messenger, but a very special messenger. And this clearly changes the debate with regard to this and messages sent to governments. We have, however, also seen that driving change and changing norms is also pushed by citizens, civil society, course, and shareholders. And here are only just some recent examples. But I think the development of renewable energy and how renewable energy has delivered during the last year is really important to put in this perspective, because we have other ways we need to drive this change today. So 2020, and this is, so I'm going to present you basically the results of the latest Renewables Global Status Report that looks at the status of renewable energy in 2020. What we see here is 2020 was actually a year of new norms. And this is not only the case from the renewable energy side. I'm not going to go into detail here, but what I would like to keep in mind from 2020 is governments, in response to COVID and the economic impacts, have been able to mobilize resources, give leadership, decisions, take decisions, even though there were many unknown. So it shows that it's possible. If governments want to do it, they can do it. The other part is clearly that 2020 has shown a peak in terms of net zero targets and commitments. And so here are only the ones from the national government side. So I think 31 targets. What is interesting here is possibly these targets so cover 80% of the global CO2 emissions. So huge potential. The reality is, however, today that only about 1/5 are actually in law. I think for 2020, however, a message is there is a new norm in terms of ambition. Now, the question is, do we walk the talk when it comes to renewable energy? And is this in line with the net zero ambition? And unfortunately, the message here is a bit critical. Here, we're only looking at the G20 countries. We see that for 2020, only 5 countries had a renewable energy target, economy-wide. I'm not speaking about the power sector only, for instance. And of those 5 countries, only 3 have reached those targets. And I think there is clearly a necessity to acknowledge that, and we see it even in the NDCs, we see it, that even though there might be a commitment to decarbonization, it does not directly translate into the acknowledgement that fossil fuel is the key problem to address, and that efficient and renewable energy is the key solution to this problem. So targets is always a question. Is a target enough? Obviously, a target is not enough. We need policy and regulatory framework. So that's a figure which we use in general to show basically the sectoral disconnect. So lots of policies on the renewable energy side for power, less on heating and cooling and transport. And I would say like the situation is even worse than less because they have been stagnating or even going down. And this is clearly something which is worrying, because again, it does show that there is a disconnect between the ambition and what is really happening. Now, a reality check in terms of the renewable energy markets, because as Stefan said, there are many positive news. So one positive news we have heard is renewable energy investment have increased 2%, so reaching $304 billion in 2020. That is something which in times of economic pressure, as we had in 2020, is something which is really to underline because it shows the resilience of the renewable energy. I would, however, like to put these 2% into perspective of what would need to happen. And IEA and IRENA have indicated this, that on average, the investment in renewable energy must triple by 2030 on average. And this means comparing 2% to 200%. See, I just leave it like this. Another aspect is, and again, lots of great advantages and developments on the renewable power front. Here we have a share of 27.1% when we're looking to the power sector. And this is clearly also showing in the trend of electrification of the heating and cooling and the transport sector as a trend. The reality, however, is that we are actually not yet at a fuel switch, which has reached 100% renewable energy. And with approximately a quarter, let's say a third, if we're positive, we're far away. The other part is also that heating and cooling is, we use more than 80% of our energy demand for heating, cooling, and transport. So this is heating and cooling in buildings and industry and the transport sector. And you see that the shares are really, really low. And I echo this again with the policy developments here. So in terms of reality check, it's rather a worrying message. What I would also like to underline with this slide here is we need to clearly move from a renewable energy supply thinking, it's not about a fuel switch only, to a link to the energy demand. This is fundamental. And this also means that if we're asking governments in terms of to change their behavior, as an energy community, we also need to change the behavior. And I think this is why this message of all renewable energy technologies working together is very important. I think it's also important to even broaden the discussion beyond the supply side. And this is basically the result of 10 years of pushing for renewable energy. The renewable share in total final energy consumption has moved between 2009 and 2019 from 8.7% to 11.2%. At the same time, the fossil fuel share has moved down from 80.3 to 80.2. And I deliberately pause here because I think this is actually what is extremely worrying. And to be honest, as a renewable energy player, we feel a bit like weird that this is the message we are showing, but I think it is our responsibility to show this because it's actually not enough to tell the positive renewable stories only if we are creating by these blind spots about the structural change that needs to happen. What does this slide mean? It clearly means that it's not enough to support energy saving, energy efficiency, and renewable energy. There needs to be a conscious decision to shift away from fossil fuel. And this is something which is extremely important and where there, as a renewable community, we also need to work very closely with players who are pushing against the fossil fuel because it is about moving out of something into something new, into something different. So the renewable part of it is fundamental, but this moving out of something is also fundamental from the renewable side. Now, admittedly, when you're thinking about players who might not be convinced yet that renewable energy is the route to go, you could ask, can renewable energy deliver? And I think this is, we still see there are myths out there on the variability. We need base load, intermittency, it's too costly, high grid shares is not possible. I mean, these are, even though renewables might be the best solution, it is often not yet the preferred solution. So I think asking this is clearly justified. The reality is, and especially when we're looking to the power sector, yes, renewable energy can deliver. It's not a technical, it's not a technological question. It's about creating the right market conditions. It's about creating the acceptance. And when we're looking here, so more than 250 gigawatt of renewable power have been added. And this has been a record year. It has been driven by solar PV and wind in particular. Also some hydropower. And interestingly, also clearly the development of offshore capacity. So new renewable power capacity hit a record increase globally. So I think this is something which is interesting because it shows what the next slide underlines, that this is happening because renewable energy is not only environmentally the best solution, but also economically. So here we're looking at fossil fuel, at the new power generating capacities. And over 80% have actually been building based on renewable power. And that's clearly because it's often a least cost option. And today in some countries, it's even less expensive to build new renewable power capacities than using existing coal capacities. And I think that is something, that's clearly a shift which we are going to observe during the next couple of years. Another aspect that I would really like to underline is when we are speaking about a broader transition, we also need to think about other players driving the transition. And often they are not only traditional energy players. So here, the corporate power purchase agreements show that corporations have really got engaged into renewable power. And we have a growth of capacities here of 18% compared to 10% when we're looking at renewable energy power development. And the feedback we have from players like RE100, for instance, is that they say for our members, renewable energy is not done for social or environmental reasons only, even though ESG is clearly one of the drivers too. But it's about energy security, it's about energy cost, it's really an economic solution. Now, 2020 was obviously in the COVID time, there was clearly a call for changing the game. And I think this is building on the announcement that the US dollar, euro, or whatever unit you want to use can only be spent once. So here was clearly the understanding that the COVID recovery packages would be needed to use the structural shift required to address climate change. Unfortunately, and I'm really sorry, I feel like I'm bringing very negative messages to the discussion, but I think we need to be really real and realistic and blunt about what's happening. Fossil fuel has been supported 6 times more than renewable energy in the economic recovery packages. And this is an analysis building on 31 countries. So, and I think I'm going to end here. And this is not only about the global state support 2020. I think there is really a need to acknowledge that what needs to happen during the next 10 years, and we collectively need to work towards it. And we need all solutions. We cannot afford in-house fights between does efficiency come before renewable energy, which renewable energy technology, etc. There are local contexts which differ very much. So it is about collectively working towards making renewable energy mainstream. This means a political focus of governments at all governments level, creating market acceptance on the energy supply side, but also on the energy consuming side. And I think this clearly also means that we need to bring other players into the discussion that are often not yet sitting around the table. And then very clearly the community acceptance. And here we see that there is globally a support for renewable energy, but locally a pushback. And that's clearly something we need to address as players. So the necessity is to bridge basically the renewable energy topic outside of the energy bubble. Now on the structural shift to renewables, There is a new norm of ambition, and I think this should be our reference point because it's guiding the way. You see, like here's the street and the roadmap. It's clear that setting net zero targets is not enough. We need the roadmaps and we need regulative frameworks. And long-term targets, and I think IEA and also ARENA have actually underlined it, are not enough. We need medium-term targets and short-term targets, acknowledging that we need to drive the structural shift from fossil fuel to renewable energy in all societal and economic activities. And from REN on one side, we are clearly calling for making renewable energy, in particular the renewable energy share, a key indicator to track the structural change and progress on supply and demand side. And here we are calling for making this not only a target, but a key performance indicator for every policy, economic activity, investment decision. Why a performance indicator? Because it is not enough to know, it's not enough to say, I want to go and win the Olympics. I need to perform toward this goal. And this means like training, it means working with the right persons, it means acknowledging and making basically the advancement transparent to
Rana, you're muted. Suddenly you're muted.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't know, where was I muted? Something has happened.
Okay.
What did you hear last, Stefan?
It was just 2 sentences or so. Would it be kind if you conclude soon now?
Okay, so maybe like, so I don't know where it ended. So probably that from REN on one side, I'll just take this part again. We're really calling for making the renewable energy share a key indicator on the supply and demand side, and to really track the structural change that is occurring. But we are calling for more, and it is really about making renewable energy, the renewable energy share, a key performance indicator in every policy, economic activity, investment, and decision, because we are speaking about an energy systems change, about a societal change and economic change, and that many decisions are outside of the energy space, but also a performance indicator because it's not enough to just have the goal, but we need to perform toward this. And this means like bringing a clear transparency about are we there or not. And this is clearly required since there is such a gap between the ambition and what we observe in the real world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ranas. You not only presented us the status of renewables and the great progress in some parts, but also what the challenges are. And in this sense, I'm very much now looking forward to welcoming Dr. Paolo Frankl, who is responsible for renewable energy at the International Energy Agency, which was created almost 50 years ago now as an OECD organization. I think at that time the motivation was to rather look after the oil supply, but I think IEA has changed a lot and is now focusing very much on climate change related issues, how to make renewables a large part of the energy supply. And Paolo, you have recently published a report, a long report next to your regular World Energy Outlook. You've published a report which is a roadmap for the global energy sector net zero by 2050, which means how to make the energy supply of the world compatible with the Paris goals. Paolo, we're very pleased to have you with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Thank you for inviting the IEA and myself to this important event on renewables working together. I would say even beyond renewables. And as Rana mentioned, the synergy for energy efficiency is an obvious and the first one. Thanks to Peter for mentioning Bonn 2004. It's actually the very, very first big publication of the IEA on renewables. Many may have forgotten that. I was not part of the organization at that time, but I had the honor to contribute to that document as an external consultant. Now, let me try to share my slides, if I manage. Can you please confirm that you see it?
Looks good, yes.
Looks good, but of course the wrong slide. Okay, can you see it? Should be fine, right?
No, I still see the same.
Okay, can you see now the unprecedented policy momentum?
No.
No. Fantastic.
Sean, can you prepare the backup?
Yeah.
Now it's changed. Now there was a change. What we see.
Now there was a change. Okay.
Yes.
Let's try again.
Yeah, I see. Please go on the presentation mode, and I think then it should be fine.
Yeah, this is what I'm trying to do.
Okay.
And please just confirm me that you are seeing the first slide with the
Yes, I do.
unprecedented policy momentum. Okay, very quickly, we are really in unprecedented times. Now, on one hand, there is the COVID crisis with an unprecedented impact on the global energy system, the biggest impact since World War II. On the other hand, there is unprecedented policy momentum looking at the country pledges. More than 120 countries are pledging for net zero emissions. We have intermediate targets that, as Rana mentioned, are almost more important than the long-term 2050 targets. We have the largest stimulus packages in economic history, although without doubt, a lot of this money for the moment is rather going to fossil fuels rather than renewables. And we are heading towards a crucial COP26 meeting in Glasgow. Now, with this background, the IEA published on the 18th of May the net zero emission roadmap, and I will be happy to look at the role of renewables there. But before that, let me show just a few short-term forecasts of what is going on right now. Because on the 18th of May, we published the roadmap, but on 1 week before, we published our market forecast update. Now, what we see coming in 2022, on average...
Paula, we still see your first slide.
Oh my goodness.
Maybe Sean, can you switch?
Yeah, sure.
Sean, are you there? Okay, now we will show you and then...
Yeah, sorry for that.
No worries. We're prepared for that. That's why we have the backup. Okay, please just tell Sean which
I will
slide to
say
show.
next, exactly. Yes. Okay. So, this is your screen now, okay? Very good. With this, I'm just showing that in the next 3 years, renewables power capacities make a big jump. It's on average is 270 for the 3 years. That's a good thing. Whether this is enough or not to be on track on the net zero emission, that's a different story, and I will come to that in a minute. But what is true, and I think we should keep it in our heads, that 90% and actually over 90% of the global power capacity increase comes from renewables. Next, please. So when you look at the dynamics in terms of countries, we see something which goes always around China. China had exceptional high additions in 2020 and then slows down in 2021 and 2022. And this is something which Rana maybe did not mention too much and which is still a very important point, which is policy uncertainty. That the policies come and go, create boom and bust cycles. Overall, they may be compensated by markets developing faster in another region. So for instance, what you see in this graph is very clearly in 2021 and 2022, China goes down and Europe becomes again the second largest market in the world. And also other countries like India and like United States have a fast deployment. But this policy unpredictability remains a major issue. Next, please. Now, in terms of technologies, we have very different stories. Solar PV is a continuous record-breaking, going up every year, and we see this trend continuing actually beyond 2022. Wind is different. It's an exceptional 2020 year, and then a slowdown, and then possibly going up again. I will come back on 1 second on this. Hydro depends on the installations of very large installations, but on hydro, I would like to mention one crucial point, that not only hydro provides low carbon electricity, but it is a natural enabler of faster PV and wind, which are variable. I totally agree with John's remark. Renewables are not intermittent, they are variable. And you need to have also dispatchable supply to compensate for the fluctuations of these variable renewables. And hydro is the best provider among renewables for this. I also wish to just announce that in 2 days from now, on Wednesday, we will publish a special hydropower market report, with an event which will be live streamed in 2 p.m. in Paris. Next, please. 1 second on this. This is the boost and boom and bust cycles for industry that are really detrimental in order to have a sustainable growth. It's not new, it's always related to China, but this is really not very sustainable for the industry to make a predictable goal. And we have to have this in mind when we think about sustainable policies going ahead. And let's go quickly to the net zero emission outlooks. Next, please. So this figure looks at the whole entire system. I can only reinforce what Rana has said. We should not just look at the electricity. The renewables community, I would say, is sometimes a little bit self-complacent in looking just at the progress in renewable electricity and forgetting that in terms of total final consumption, the whole electricity is only 1/5. The big thing is energy. And my first message here of this roadmap of the IEA is energy efficiency first. Our roadmap is a roadmap of economic growth. The GDP more than doubles in 2050, but the whole energy consumption actually goes down by 10%. And obviously this implies very, very strong assumptions on energy efficiency. The supply of this energy becomes dominated by renewables, 2/3, 70%. I'm speaking about the whole energy, not just the electricity, in various forms, and the rest is for nuclear or abated fossil fuels. Next one. Now, the roadmap has two big pillars. One is, in this decade, the massive, fastest possible deployment of all clean technologies that we know. And to give you just a benchmark for solar and wind, this means more than 1,000 gigawatt per year in 2030. So this is 4 times the record year of 2020. Feasible? Probably, but a challenge. Electric cars, it means which had another record in 2020, which is very good, but we have to multiply this by almost a factor 20 to make sure that we have almost 60 millions of electric car sales. And of course, with electric cars goes the charging infrastructure and distribution grids, making sure that the distribution networks are strong enough. The third is energy efficiency, as I said, very ambitious. The energy intensity need to go to 4% per year. And actually, that one, if you ask me which one of the three is more challenging, the most challenging to me is the one on energy efficiency, because it implies also the behavioral change of so many millions of people. And it requires very predictable, very strong policy incentives and stability. Next, please. The second is, and thank you, Rana, for showing this graph before me, to put the milestones over time to get to the long-term net zero targets. We have looked at more than 400 technology milestones. I will only mention four important ones for renewables. In 2030, as I said, more than 1 terawatt of global installations just for solar and wind, but also already 150 megaton from low carbon hydrogen with 850 gigawatt of electrolyzers. Now, this 850 gigawatt is a 2,500 times increase compared to 2019. I repeat, 2,500. In 2040, looking at fuels, 50% of fuels used in aviation are sustainable. And basically, this comes either from advanced biofuels or from hydrogen and synthetic fuels, also low carbon. In 2050, almost 70% of the global generation of electricity is coming from solar and PV and wind. And we have in 2045, 3,000 of gigawatt of electrolyzers. This is basically 10,000 times more than today. This is the scale of the challenge. Of course, the power sector decarbonizes first, and then come the harder to abate sectors, industry and transport and buildings. But this is just even a larger scope of working together, where renewables not just have to work together with renewables themselves, but also with energy efficiency and other technologies, and to have including an ordered transition of phase out of fossil fuels. Next, please. I go back to electricity because I think this slide is how can I say, has a visual impact. The second point, the second pillar after the energy efficiency is electrification. And really a big thing happening here with more than 70,000 terawatt hours of electricity generation and demand by 2050. A big majority of this, 70%, is solar and PV and wind, which calls for massive flexibility for system integration, much better grids, affordable storage, dispatchable supply from other renewables or low carbon fuel sources, and of course demand side demand. And I can only repeat this so many times. This is not just about supply, it is also about demand. One last remark. In this graph, hidden, there are more than 12,000 terawatt hours that are utilized to produce merchant hydrogen. And this gives you also a sense how renewables indirectly contribute to the clean energy transition. My last slide with some concluding points. Next, please. So 4 main points. First, while it is true that some renewables are becoming cheaper and cheaper, more competitive, this is mainly a solar and PV wind story. And while they are transforming power systems worldwide, this is by far not enough. First point, we need to focus on system integration. That has to be secure and cost effective. This means attract investments in grids. Infrastructure need time to be built. So in long-term planning, an investment decision needs to be taken right away. Third point, we need to look at the whole energy systems, at heating and cooling, at transport. And this means, and all the end-use sector that are harder to abate. So this means working together, but also looking at innovation for hydrogen, other low-carbon fuels, and battery storage, and also combining with carbon capture, use, and storage where this makes sense, and it does make sense in many cases. And my last point, even if renewables are getting better and better, don't be mistaken. The role of governments is more important than ever to have predictable trends, predictable policies to achieve the targets. The targets are fantastic, but they are not enough. Governments' policies need to address non-economic barriers, attract affordable financing, which is not necessarily where it should be in developing and emerging economies, and accelerate system integration and innovation all across the energy system. I'll stop it here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Paolo. That was a very good overview of how you see the future. And just at this point of time, just a very brief comment that in the past, you've sometimes been too conservative in the prediction of renewables. I'm sure this time you agree that let's hope that this is again a little bit the case, and we will manage to maybe at least what you predict, but maybe even we can do more. Maybe we can come back later to the discussion. I would like now to go to our next speaker, Dr. Ricardo Gorini from the International Renewable Energy Agency, a much younger organization which was founded in 2009. On the initiative, I should mention here, it was first a group of parliamentarians. It was Hermann Scher at the 2004 Renewables conferences for the first time discussed. Then it was created, is now based in Abu Dhabi with an office also in Bonn. And Ricardo, you have recently launched a World Energy Transition Outlook, which describes a 1.5 degrees pathway, which means how the world energy supply can be in line with the kind of what we really want to have 1.5 degrees Paris goals. We look forward to hearing from you how IRENA looks at the future energy supply system. Ricardo, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stefan. It's a pleasure to be here and to bring this IRENA's view. Good to have Paolo and Rani as well. It's really a nice discussion. So I think this, working together is really key. So I think that was a very good title decision from your side. So I congratulate, because it's quite challenging. We hear from both previous presentations how important it is to really raise the ambitions in all levels, energy-wise, all together. So I think that's really very, very important. And I would like to bring as well this message here. So let me try to share my presentation.
Ricardo, do you have any problems?
No,
it's
just
coming.
a second. Yeah. Can you see now?
Yeah, we see your screen, but not the presentation.
Is this presentation mode now? Can you see?
Yes, but we don't see the presentation. We see your desktop.
Oh.
Just, I think if you open it, should be fine.
Yeah, I already have it with, presentation mode. Maybe again, can you see?
It's still the desktop. We see your file, so don't show too much here.
Oh, yeah. So no, maybe
Sean,
let's try the backup as I had the same issue with Paolo, so I stopped sharing now.
Yeah, I think we didn't get as a backup your presentation. So maybe.
Well, I'll try sharing again. So
yeah, try to share again.
Stefan, can I profit to respond to your comment?
Please, yes, let's make use of the time indeed.
Yes, thanks. So you're right, of course, that our outlook have changed over time, but they really reflect the changes in the policies of the countries. And today's the pledges are a completely different story from just 2 months ago. Anyway, floor back to Irina.
Can you see it now?
Yes, now it looks good, and I think you maybe go to presentation mode, and we see already the first slide.
Okay, can you see it now? Presentation
Super.
mode.
Yes,
okay.
Please go
Sorry
ahead.
about that. So I just wanted to start with this, the level of the challenge. As you can see here, to get to the 1.5C by 2050, we are talking about the remaining carbon around 5 gigatons. So it's quite a huge effort to bring that down as soon as possible. So what we present here in this graph is exactly the deep decrease that's needed in all emissions from the next decade, but of course as well in the following 2 decades. So we need really to bring all end-use sectors. That was an important highlight already mentioned. So transport, buildings, industry, and of course the power sector. As you can see, you have the numbers here. So it's clear the level of effort. So we would like to bring as IRENA, what we understand is the roadmap that we present here to decrease these emissions. And I would like to start also with the story. When I was back in 2000 working to the Brazilian government, so we had these long-term energy planning discussions there. And just to give you an idea, we were discussing if wind was a possibility or not in our future perspectives in the following 5 to 10 years. At that time, there are a lot of questions regarding, oh my God, wind is not really competitive. Is this going to happen? And just to be short here, the history. So we have a successful wind penetration in the energy matrix. Now is a key, resource that is penetrating in Brazil and everywhere in the world. Just to mention one. But this is just to remind us that the challenge that we face and how we look at it in the future sometimes is really, let's say, contaminated with the eyes of today. So I think we need to remain positive in that sense, because it is possible, So let's try to push further. I mean, the competitiveness is there. We will see a few numbers. And, in terms of energy planning, my message to governments is, let's push for it. Let's push for it. As I said, it's something that we may surprise ourselves on how important the penetration will move forward. So, and what are we talking about? I mean, as I said, there are several possibilities to address the emission reduction. It's not just power sector, indeed. We need to go to end-use sectors. We need to bring energy efficiency. So it's very important to have energy efficiency everywhere, including the supply side. We need to move forward to bring the direct renewable use to end-use sectors. So basically what we're talking about, really, the transport sector has to go through a massive transformation, especially. We will come forward later on that. But electrification is what we understand one main driver here, because how you are going to transform all this, let's say, fossil fuel consumption into renewable. Electrification has a major component. As we can see here, of course, together with the hydrogen and derivatives, we can combine all of these, green electrification, green hydrogen, for instance, and we can bring that forward to the many different markets, namely hard to decarbonize sectors, as was mentioned, shipping, aviation, industries, a couple of subsectors there. So it's very important that we understand the whole picture here. There is a role for CCS and BECCS, especially BECCS. We understand this combination is an interesting one to bring forward the emissions down. So 90% of the decarbonization will come from those components that you can see here. So first of all, we agree here that we need to keep flat the total primary energy consumption. We cannot really expect that this is a continuous growth, and it's not just acceptable anymore. So here we have a role of energy efficiency, of effective and efficient use in all the sectors. And of course, the result is a final energy consumption that is more aligned. And of course, the combination will bring, I would say, consumption down, or at least not increasing. What I would like also to address here is the importance of this pace. So look at the pace that's needed in terms of renewable energy penetration for that to happen. And this final energy consumption now. So if you look at this 2018 versus 2050, I think this is very illustrative. This is a massive, massive transformation. And we're not talking about here the energy sector, because for each one of those little boxes here to happen, we need to really understand the dynamics behind that. So if you look at what's going on in terms of fossil fuel, of course, in 2018, today, we still have a lot of fossil fuel consumption. We heard that from Rana. We expect by 2050, around 10% of fossil. So we need to bring that to a completely different level, So, of course, electrification, again, you can see 21%, 2018, we need to move to 51 or 60 if you consider this green hydrogen altogether, So basically, it's a lot about power sector transformation. So we need to bring, of course, investment, scale up here, all this, I would say, operation of the system, flexibility, variable renewable energy. So we need really to bring that into the agenda today for that to happen in the near future. Hydrogen is really key now. I mean, we understand that hydrogen, it's not a new discussion, but now I think it's getting really serious. We need to address hydrogen in a serious way, because this is how we will move forward to the 1.5. Otherwise, we will have problems to address the hard to decarbonize sectors and many other possibilities that hydrogen can solve us. And of course, bioenergy. Bioenergy is key. We're talking here about modern, sustainable bioenergy. So we need to address a lot of issues that are still not allowing bioenergy to really make this full penetration in different markets. So I think here it's important to address that we need to reach 130, 150 exajoules by 2050. It's quite a lot of bioenergy that we need to move forward. So having said that, what are exactly the numbers related to power sector? Please have a look on this, electricity capacity graph. I think that's very illustrative. We're talking a huge amount of penetration of renewable energy related technologies. So it's 90+% of share. So basically wind, power, hydro, geothermal, biomass, we need all of them to really make this future renewable possible. So we can explore that also further in the Q&A sessions, but it's very important to have all of them on board. And I agree with Paulo, the role of hydro is key as we need to have a lot of I would say flexibility related services that the combination of the technologies can play a role. So again, I would like to highlight that specifically in the end use sectors, each subsector, each sector has its own characteristics. So please look at the contributions in terms of emission reduction from each one of those. Transport, again, has a very important role. Of course, industry followed by industry. But I would like to highlight the transformation in transport that can really bring a lot of spillover, in different aspects, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of how we change the way our societies work. So here, if you look at the numbers, we're talking about really renewable electrification as key components. This is very, very important. Infrastructure is not yet there. We need to discuss this with governments. I mean, it's progressing well. We need to reach 1.8 billion vehicles by 2050. I think Paulo has similar numbers. So this is a massive transformation. We need really to go further and if we need to pick something, let's do that. Let's transform the transport sector altogether. Again, electrification. Of course, there is a price to pay. I mean, usually we will need around 100 trillion, okay? 100 trillion is the planned scenario, it's energy, so we need that. Additionally, we would like to have 33 trillions further in terms of the needs of this 1.5C scenario. And look, it's 1 trillion additional investment. So it's not that much if you look at all the benefits, and indeed we could further discuss all the benefits related to this in the Q&A sessions, but it's very important to address a massive transformation in terms of the quality of those investments, the shift towards renewable energy, electrification, energy efficiency. So we really need that to happen in the coming decade. It's not just for 2050. So just to bring them some granularity here, of course, I would like to emphasize here the role of power sector, and please have a look on hydro, investment scale up, biomass, solar, wind, geothermal. They all need to scale a lot, and we still need to, I would say, to bring those investments to the table. So to conclude, again, energy efficiency together with renewable energy and of course electrification. But I would like to bring this here because we start to connect with the actions that are needed. It's all about a multi-stakeholder work. It's not just the role of government, it's not just the role of consumption side, it's not just the role of supply chain. We all need to be together to understand what are the benefits that are related to renewables and how we would move forward. In these regards, the investments that are needed, 4 trillions in average per year, would require a lot of funding opportunities. And we need really to, as stakeholders that are engaged in this sector, to push this financial sector to a new level of investment and funding in terms of renewable energy. So the green taxonomy discussion, all related to, I would say, regulation of these finance aspects, that will help a lot the post-COVID recovery in the following years. So thank you very much, and back to you, Stefan.
Thank you so much, Ricardo. I think that was very interesting. And maybe we can later ask both of you, Paolo and now Ricardo, where you see the differences. Because I mean, from the first impression listening to you is that there is a lot is similar. I mean, you both obviously underline the importance of efficiency. That's just one of it. And certainly renewables will be the main energy sources in the future. Now it's time for the REN Alliance partners. And it's now my pleasure. We have each of us agreed that we would like to focus on specific aspects, and then each of us has a short intervention. In the interest of time, I would request all the partners to keep really the few minutes, and maybe it's possible to do it in 5 minutes, that we still have some time for discussion. And the first who is going to intervene now is Dr. Marit Brommer, who is the Executive Director of the International Geothermal Association. Marit, you will speak about the importance of policies to achieve what's been presented and what we also want to see. Marit, floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you, Stefan, on behalf of the REN Alliance, to have us all speaking on the importance of collaboration, because it is not one that fits it all. It is all of us that fits the entire goal of achieving this 100% renewable mission that I think we all underwrite. I'm very pleased, Rana, because you nail it when you say it is about the consumption, it's about the demand, it's about the people who are using energy. And if they don't demand change, we can target whatever we want from the supply side. And I say this predominantly speaking on behalf of geothermal, because I see that that's always been our push. We push the technology. We cry out for more geothermal from a technology side, but we hardly sort of advocate it. And hence, this is really the change we have been targeting together with all our friends within the Renewable Alliance, Rana, with you, with IEA, and with IRENA, that we look at all these end users and ask ourselves the question, how can we transform the energy consumption patterns? Whether it is industry focused, yes, we are an industry association, so we're very interested in developing geothermal on behalf of our industry partners. But we're really targeted now from a policy point of view, because if you're just looking at tax breaks and carbon taxes, and if you try to make these rigid mechanisms in order to allow more supply coming into your grid when we talk about power, or very importantly for us in geothermal, we look a lot to drive the energy change patterns for heating and cooling. And it is with that in mind that we have targeted a few countries where leadership, especially political leadership, on robust frameworks for policy designs and regulations on understanding how to shift not just the fossil fuel base, but the entire thinking of what is sustainable for my energy consumption pattern. How much of electricity is actually needed in combination with the heating and cooling demand for a specific sector? And to take a few examples here within geothermal, we've been working hard with the agribusiness side. Food is going to be fundamental for all of us human beings out there. And the need to more locally grown food also looks at an agribusiness, for instance, the horticulture and the agribusiness greenhouse sector, in terms of 90% based on gas, 90% based on fossil fuel supply chains. Looking at it from a green certificate point of view, looking at local options for diversification of solar with, for instance, geo. So have a heat pump together with a solar system, or have a geothermal well producing enough heat to combine it with solar electricity, PV, or in any type of setting that can help drive that both type of supply into a given cluster of agricultural promising businesses. And cities are doing that more and more as well, system integration, but it requires someone who takes, let's say, the lead in terms of designing, in terms of facilitating, but also in terms of orchestrating that energy consumption pattern. Another thing that I vouch very strongly for is that, yes, again, to Rana and her team, I think the GSR clearly shows a couple of brave things. Not only do you really show and underpin the need to transform to transform the energy consumption, but also the fact that 80% is still fossil fuel based. 10 years, you said, Rana, 10 years of hard work, and it's still 80% fossil fuel based. So if we're continuing on that path, it's going to be darn hard, I would say, to meet that Paris Agreement goal. And I think part of the thinking behind changing just the supply and looking at the switch side of things is about understanding the consumption for direct heating and cooling purposes. Because I do get it why people want to focus on electricity. I'm not against that mission, but if I look at the levelized cost of energy, which is equivalent for many cases on the levelized cost of electricity, I really ask myself sometimes the question, and maybe this is where we hold hands with solar as well, why are we not targeting more and more the levelized cost of heat? Because in most cases, if our consumption stays around at 50 to 80% of our energy consumption sits for reasons and purposes for heating and cooling, then I think it's time to think about how can we quantify the unit of heat better in an economic system that helps drive to learn from each other to drive benefits out of our energy consumption and talk about value instead of a constant demand for a cost benefit analysis based on cost. I leave it like that. Stefan, again, I want to thank you for your your opportunity to talk about policies and the needs to do some adjustment in our thinking. I think it's time to hold hands much stronger across the entire value chain for renewables. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Martin. And I think indeed we need kind of new paradigms now with this huge transformation that we need. We heard from Ricardo, you were also already touching that at the end of your speech. And now it's time for our next speaker, for our next intervention from Eddie Rich. Eddie, you are the Executive Director at the International Hydropower Association. And you are talking about something that also, I think, leads us into this new paradigm about the aspect of sustainability in this transformation that we're aiming at. Eddie, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Stefan. Thanks, everyone. And well done, Stefan, for organising all of this. And I think I echo what Rena has said about well done for calling it Renewables Work Together, because I think we've heard all the speakers say that this is not just about generation, it is about the whole mix, getting the most out of wind and solar and variable renewables. And so you need balance, you need flexibility. You've got a choice for long duration energy storage at the moment, improving technologies really between gas and hydro. That's a big challenge for the world. And I think most of you have been following some of the chat going on in parallel to this. And within that, Merv and some others have said, yeah, look, we don't need these technologies like hydropower that have a bad record on environmental sustainability. It's a good challenge. It's a good challenge. We haven't always been beautiful, and we need to do better. We need to recognise that. We hear this a lot, of course, and I think we need to own that challenge, and that's what we've been trying to do over the last 15 years. We have, I suppose, as the granddaddies of the renewables, been facing this challenge for longer and hopefully got some lessons which are helpful for other renewables as well. If you're tackling a problem as complicated as addressing climate change, then you're probably going to need to build some infrastructure. If you're going to need to build some infrastructure, you're going to have some challenges to conservation. So the challenge is, how do you create a net positive impact? How do you measure getting that net positive impact? That's the challenge we set ourselves 15 years ago, and we've been working with environmental and social NGOs, with governments, with international financial institutions, and we developed a well-recognized international set of sustainability tools, environmental, social, and governance tools to assess what is it that is good practice and what is best practice. And now these have been developed, as I say, in multi-stakeholder environment, not just a industry self-regulating, and it's been recognized now, aligned with the World Bank and IFC sustainability framework. The Climate Bonds Initiative have recently used it for their hydropower requirements, and the EU taxonomy use it for their sustainability investment framework. So we've got these tools which tell you what's good practice, what's best practice. Now we've got to turn them into a certifiable standard. That's what we're doing, and we will launch it in 2 months' time, September. And that is the chance for us to say, right, this on a binary scale is good practice or not good practice, and then there's a whole set of nuance between good practice and best practice. And we try to encourage constant improvement against environmental, social, and governance requirements. And you'll have a chance to be part of the consultation on that if you go on to hydrosustainability.org. As I say, that's been developed in a multi-stakeholder environment. We're going to try and embed that within our own organisation, within International Hydropower Association. So we're moving from being a sort of pay-to-play kind of organisation to being a values-based organisation. We're going to try and only represent the progressive end of the sector that has committed and is demonstrably committing to sustainable hydropower. For us, there is no excuse now, because this has been accepted by so many wide bodies. There's no excuse going forward for any hydropower development not to be aligned with good practice, not to have a net positive. We need to get that message out, because the challenge that Merv and others have set is a fair one, but we have to be better than we have been in the past. Now, I just wanted to sort of set that out very clearly. We will be working with Geothermal as well, to see whether some of these tools, which we've already begun to work with them on, may be developed into a geothermal standard. And if any other of the renewables are also facing some of these challenges, we'd be more than happy to work with them. You know, you could imagine 5-10 years down the line a sort of a unifying framework for sustainability for the renewables. I think that would be very welcome. So that's what we want to say. We, as hydropower, we feel we have to play our full role in the energy transition, the challenges that have been set by the speakers, but we will only do that when people realise and accept we are sustainable. That actually happens when we take on those challenges. Finally, I want to give a big plug and big shout out for IEA's special report on hydrogen. I haven't seen it, so I don't know, whether it says nice things, nasty things about us. Bring it on.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eddie. I don't know whether it's just on my side, but just your last sentence, I couldn't hear so well. I understand from Paolo that, Paolo, you were happy about what Eddie said. Thank you very much. Anyway, Eddie, I think you touched a very important topic. Sustainability is important, and for sure we want to be better than our predecessors, the fossil energy sector, in particular nuclear fossil sector. And there's certainly less impact from renewables, but there is some, and we have to minimize that. There's no doubt about that. Now, my great pleasure to welcome our next representative, Dr. David Rene. Dave, You are the immediate past president, I think that's your formal role, of the International Solar Energy Society. And you're still representing ISIS at the REN Alliance. And you want to speak about, I think that's another important challenge, comment on international supply chains, an important industrial aspect. Dave, a very good morning too. I think you are based in Colorado now, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Yes, I would like to just make a few comments about supply chains. These were already addressed by our excellent three speakers earlier, and in particular, Ricardo teed up the supply chain issue about the need for a reliable and certainly economic supply chains, international supply chains to power the energy transformation. So I'd like to address 4 points here regarding supply chains. First of all, and of course, as we all know, the pandemic has reminded us as to how vulnerable our globalized and even some local supply chains can be to disruptions such as from the pandemic. And so part of what this has driven is a need to, or has identified a need to create more local manufacturing. In other words, not to rely on just a few countries to provide the major source of our energy, of our transformed energy systems. And my focus is going to be perhaps on the solar technologies, both as we saw from the previous presentations, that solar photovoltaics, for example, is going to play a very major role in the electrification of our energy sector, but there's also solar thermal technologies that are going to play key roles in certain niche markets for solar thermal or for thermal applications. But I think some of these comments apply perhaps for the entire energy transformation. So again, the first point, the pandemic has reminded us of how vulnerable we are to our globalized systems. Another point is that geopolitics plays a very important role, and certain steps have been taken in recent years that can actually harm supply chains. We've had some tariff wars taking place in recent years. Punitive tariffs can be harmful. We need to continue to look for fair trade practices globally to avoid supply chains being affected by unreasonable tariffs. Another point is this traceability of where the supplies are coming from. There's some industries are concerned about making sure that fair labor practices go into the manufacturing of systems, and these need to be considered when we look at economically viable and reliable supply chains. A third point I would like to make is the access to rare earth or critical metals. This is going to be very critical, especially in the solar community, for example, and in the wind community. Certain materials such as copper, lithium, nickel, cobalt, and manganese, as well as rare earth materials, we're going to need much more access to these materials in the energy transformation. And so it's going to be very critical that we make sure that the access to these materials is available to power our energy transformation. One area that this is that's supporting this is in the corporate sourcing of raw materials. That can be very critical here. Battery metals are going to be very important as we see going forward. So we need very transparent, secure, sustainable, and fair supply chains to get access to these materials. I would like to call attention, for example, to the figure in the IEA Net Zero Energy Report, figure 4.8, which is on page 163, which very basically shows how currently coal is the most valuable, or has the highest value for critical materials in the energy supply chain. But by 2050, coal is going to be almost disappear in that, and we have to consider the other critical materials, such not only rare earth materials, but silicon and manganese, cobalt, graphite, nickel, lithium, and copper are going to be the primary materials that are going to be of value for this energy transformation. And then fourth, The fourth point is disposal and recycling of used or unusable systems. We've already experienced over the last generation, new generations of wind turbine technologies coming into place. There's been replanting of wind turbines all over the world. And this is beginning to happen in solar as well, as we get more reliable solar systems to replace older and failing systems. This is going to create a significant amount of potential raw materials for recycling purposes to help alleviate some of the rare earth and critical metals supply chain that we're going to be facing here. So for solutions, continued international cooperation and addressing the geopolitical situation, but also recognizing national interests as we do that. Corporate sourcing initiatives based on sustainability practices are going to be a very critical step in this supply chain issue. A shift of all investments, such as going from internal combustion engines to green technologies, must take place right away so that we can get the supply chains supporting those new systems put into place, and improve technology and efficiencies and recycling efforts to minimize supply chain issues with raw materials. So those are my points, and I want to thank our three speakers for teeing up the supply chain issues.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dave. And indeed, this is a very important topic, and kind of underlining why Paolo rightly said that there are numbers which are impressive when we look at it from today. So we have to create these supply chains, and I think we all know that this is not something that happens, just doesn't come automatically. So we have to be focused on that. Now I have the pleasure to refer to our next speaker, and this is Christian Rakos, the president of the World Bioenergy Association. And Christian, a very warm welcome to you as well. You'll speak about technology innovation and what role that plays. Christian.
Thank you very much. Pleased to participate in this webinar, and I would like to continue where Eddie stopped, which is the issue of sustainability. And I would like to show you how innovation can actually make a very significant contribution to sustainability. Obviously, bioenergy also has sustainability issues. Bioenergy, if you use it with a traditional technology, is a very polluting and very inefficient source of energy. And in fact, more than 3 billion people are still using this source of energy in an inefficient and polluting way. So there is really something to do, and that is what I want to address. And I want to give you 3 examples of how innovation can really make a difference in terms of sustainability. The first is biomass upgrading. There are technologies available that can use very little energy and still improve the quality of biomass as a source of energy very significantly. And then, of course, technologies for combustion, and I will mention 2 for biomass heating and biomass cooking. First, pelletization. Pelletization is a very simple technology. It is the technology that has the least demand for energy to transform a inhomogeneous, a very fluffy, frequently type of material such as straw or other agricultural residues, or also waste from wood processing, into a reasonably good energy carrier that has a high energy density that's easy to use. And to give you an idea, the amount of energy needed to densify biomass to pellets is about 2 to 3% of the energy content. So it is really a very effective way of transforming biomass. So that is the reason why it has been widely used more and more around the globe. Unfortunately, we don't have the numbers from pellet production in China, but they are probably significant, between 10 and 15 million tons. So you can see within the last 20 years, this technology for upgrading biomass has been really successful in many places in the world. The next case study I want to show you is the reduction of emissions of boilers for domestic heating. Many people, not only in Europe, but also in North America and in other regions where it is cold during wintertime, are using biomass for heating. And in the past, these technologies have been very polluting. And what I'm showing you, every spot, every dot in this slide shows you the value, the emission value of a newly introduced biomass boiler in Austria. And as you can see, over the last 40 years, there's a tremendous improvement. Emissions have basically declined by a factor of 1,000. So what was extremely polluting 40 years ago today is very, very clean. And even in the last 2 or 3 years, we have now reached a level where we can actually talk of zero emission boilers. So boilers that have lower emission values than natural gas boilers. So biomass can be used in an entirely clean way, and the technology is there. It's not somewhere in the future, it's there, it's available, can be used, and is going to be introduced into the markets in the next couple of years. So that is one example. And another example, and that's already the end of my presentation, because I don't want to cut the time for discussion, is clean cooking. Clean cooking is a major issue. And in this graph, you can see the emission values of traditional forms of wood use for cooking. And I want to reiterate, 3 billion people are still reliant on this type of technology. And you can see where the red arrow goes, that is the emission value of the fab stove, cook stove, an advanced cook stove that was constructed based on the most sophisticated technologies we have today to improve biomass combustion, computational fluid dynamics. So a computer really simulates the combustion process. And that simulation shows you how to alter your technology to achieve very low emissions. And here you can see the emissions that are now available using agricultural residues, not wood, agricultural residues as a fuel, pelletized agricultural residues as a fuel, are now by a factor of at least 100 lower than traditional biomass use. And this cook stove costs about $50. So it's something that is absolutely possible to disseminate, particularly if carbon credits are available to finance this, because $50 sounds like not a lot of money, but of course for households that are poor, it is a lot of money. But the technologies are there, and I think there is a very significant future for sustainable use of bioenergy, and that's my contribution. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christian. I think that it's important to point at where there is technical innovation, and certainly all our technologies, there's still a lot of room to improve technologies. Like cars, we started using them in the end of the 19th century, and they're certainly not the same like they used to be at that time. They're not the same like they used to be 30 or 40 years after introduction, but this technology is still developing. I mean, and that's like with all the technologies. I think we can say that we have the basic technologies, but this innovation still plays an important role. Now, let me come to my intervention on behalf of World Wind Energy Association, and this is about an aspect which has not been touched much so far, socio-economic aspects of renewable energy. And I think we have, and let me just, now it's up to me to solve the technical problems here. I hope you can see the I have just few slides here, or 4 slides here. What we have to first, of course, see that, or we have to, I think, be aware of, is that this is a dramatic change in one of the core economic sectors that we have in all parts of the world. And it's fundamentally changing economic structures in many ways. And that is why I believe that it's very important to keep in mind and put them into the center of the discussion and of our strategies to involve the people around the world. Also because we need to mobilize these resources. But the starting point is that we have to be aware, and people have to be aware. I think we are aware that renewables are abundant and they are everywhere. And that is already changing the situation economically, but also socially so much. Because in not only in theory, but in principle, nowadays everybody can have its solar system and can harvest the energy. So this is something that we need to use in a positive way. And I think Irina referred to that already a little bit. But what is really important is to make this, what we often call transition, from the people's perspective, a transformation, so that they understand they are part of this change that we see. This change is necessary, not only, but now a lot because of climate change mitigation, but it's something they can play an active role in. Now I have this problem that my slide is not moving. Okay, so what needs to be done is that all these benefits which go along with this transition, transformation, that they become not only visible, but that the people feel them, that they see there are very concrete investment opportunities. Some people speak about what we need is also going into the cultural sphere. We need a renewable solar culture, which makes that beyond economics. But I think what is really important is mobilize people by making them understand, or in many cases, and that's where we started, for example, in Denmark, when wind power started, there were hundreds of cooperatives. People were the drivers of this change, and they noticed there's something positive happening in their community, in their village, in their town. And I feel that now we are at this point that with the climate movement, with these hundreds of thousands of millions of people who want to do something actively, that this is a huge opportunity we can make use of, because people there don't want to feel like paralyzed. They just can't stand there and say, I want to stop climate change, but they can now be part, and they can find a job in renewable energy. They can have their own solar system and be part of the kind of renewable revolution that we actually need. Practically, we do this, for example, in the IRENA Coalition for Action, where there is a community energy working group which deals with exactly that aspect. How can we overcome the bottlenecks, and how can we kind of free-frame the policies around so that the policies become more inclusive, that the policies, the frameworks enable the people to participate in the markets, in the energy markets. They're not anymore so much focusing on what it used to be. We have not only now a few oil companies which are dominating the market for the oil that you buy for your fossil, for a combustion engine, but now you charge your electric vehicle and you can use your own solar power for that. Yeah, so the future, I think that what we need to do is understand the diversity, the socioeconomic dimensions, and the manifold benefits that the citizens will have a much more active role. We need to change the paradigm, go for this 100% with all the renewables playing their role. And that is what I think, Peter, you started using that word. We need this symphony of the renewables, which is also kind of referring to the cultural dimension that I mean, which again brings us back to the social aspect. We need a new culture that makes this new paradigm that we have something that people can experience in a very positive way. Well, with this, I am I've concluded the last intervention. Thank you for also listening to me. And I think now time is, I hope everybody still has time, we're a little bit over time, is now for questions, also from the audience, but of course also if any of the panelists has questions to the others. As I saw, there was a lot of discussion already in the chat here, and I think nobody could really follow all this. I would now ask people to, if you have a brief question, put it into the chat. Maybe we can just start with this one point, because I think that is something people would certainly be interested in. We heard, I think, very comprehensive presentations from IRENA and from the IEA. If I may ask both of you, where do you see the differences between the work that both of you are doing, and where would you see there's mainly kind of same direction? If I may start with Paolo.
There are differences, but to be honest, I would highlight the similarities, which is it's a huge change. To be honest, I mean, obviously, if you go quickly through it, the biggest differences are in energy efficiency. We are a little bit more ambitious than IRENA. We use nuclear. There are a few things, but for me, the big message does not change. This is a huge paradigm shift, which needs a huge acceleration of all forms of renewables, a big change in infrastructure that enables these renewables, a much stronger focus on heat transport as opposed just to electricity. I would stress by far these similar messages, which should sound as a big alert and a big alarm also to governments to take immediate action to accelerate these trends by a factor 10 or 100, as Rana mentioned herself. I frankly speaking, I would stress the similarities much more than the differences. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Ricardo.
I have to agree with you, Paolo. So it's amazing how similar the scenarios are indeed. So basically the message is very similar in that sense of the transformation and the effort that's needed. We reach similar numbers in terms of full energy, total primary energy, final energy. So we more or less understand that we need by 2050 to be at nearly the same energy mix there. But indeed, it's not just about power, it's about energy as a whole. So the end use sectors, it's very important. As you pointed as well, we understand nuclear has a limited role in terms of competitiveness. So basically, this is the difference. We may have more renewables in the power in the end, but not that much. But in general, the end use sector, I understand, is not that different as well. So our guidance are similar, and this is very good to have both agencies with pushing that in the same direction. So 1.5 again is feasible. Let's push for that. As I said before, indeed, it's very important to act now rather than wait. Right, the technologies are there.
Yeah, I think that is indeed. I would support this. That it's indeed important that, in particular, policymakers understand that we talk about dimensions that we need to accelerate this transition. Anyone would like to add to these statements from our panelists?
I would like to jump in from one side. I think
Please, Rana.
yeah, there is indeed. I think that's a very strong message to have IEA and IRENA aligning basically on the vision. I think that's super important. It's also important because the messenger is different and the players who will listen to the messages are different. And I think that is something which is very powerful and which we need to use much more strategically, I think, as renewable energy community to build up alliances that are a bit atypical with the mining sector, etc., having strong messages on renewable energy as a sustainable solution. I would, however, like to underline some differences because I think in some countries they can be quite critical. And we've just received, I think, through the IRENA Coalition for Action, some input on Japan, for instance. I think when it comes down to net zero, there is a difference between net zero and 100% renewable energy. And the difference comes in when we're talking about CCS, the difference comes in when we're speaking about nuclear. And the difference probably also comes in when we speak about hydrogen that is not renewable-based hydrogen. And this is not a particular message to IEA, not at all, but I just think is depending on the messengers, this is where we will need to have a much more differentiated discussion, especially when we're looking at countries where the transition is more challenging, where it's not only cheap renewable electricity that will make it happen, where we have a space-constrained environment, etc. So I think it's that's really something where we also see that at one point the global discussion is not enough anymore. We need to bridge the global discussion to what is happening locally, to the players that are there, resources there, flexibility options, whether it is the interconnection, whether it is a sector coupling or whatsoever, and also governance when it comes to cities and citizens involvement.
Yeah, Rana, I mean, we're on the same page here, without doubt, and there is a question which is related to that, and you know that we've been pushing always for these kind of decentralized approaches. There is a question before we go to Christian. Let's just briefly refer to that here. Sandra Prüwe is asking about that, how to make funds available for such storytelling, for mobilizing citizens, etc. I mean, I think we are not the right ones here to really give or tell you exactly where you can get that money. But Rana, maybe you would like to add to that from that perspective. It just fits to what you just said. And I know that REN 21 is also working on that and trying to kind of be the multiplier that mobilizes.
I mean, I think, again, from our side, we clearly see like budget is really a problem here, especially when we're looking at the renewable sector. Historically, there is not the same budget on communication, campaigning, etc., as we'll see in more conventional energy player sectors. So this is something to also take into account when we are speaking about a rather decentralized voice or narrative that are rather scattered from the renewable side, because it's different renewable energy technologies, because it's in the context of climate, in context of energy access, energy security, so more scattered. And I think this is why it is really important that basically all players on the panel today are underlining how important it is to work together. I think this is really about this rather unification or an amplification of some narrative on renewable energy. Now the reality is, and I think we always say like, we're asking many decision makers to change their behavior. And I think that also requires behavior change on our side. It means that we bring in other disciplines to complement our expert discussions. Because we need to make basically our expert discussions relevant to decision makers who don't understand what we are speaking about. Let's be really honest. And this is not meant in a negative way. I'm myself an engineer. When I'm participating on modeling of infrastructure, etc., there is a moment where I cannot follow. When I listen to some finance experts, I think this is really, it's highly technical. So I think there is really a need that we enable ourselves to bridge basically between these ecosystems by addressing jargon. So investment in translators, so to say. And the other part is, and I think this is where long marketing studies and behavior change, etc., show it. It is not enough to have the facts. If the facts and science were enough, we would not be where we are. We need to, and this sounds like a very, I don't know, slimy, I'd say, but we need to touch people's heart. And this means that they engage in the vision. And we also need to touch their wallets, because the community energy and citizens involvement works well if you also have a part of the auctions dedicated to citizens and community energy. And when a farmer looks at a wind turbine and knows that while it is running, he or she might not particularly like the aesthetics of it, but ultimately there is an economic benefit for them too. So I think this is basically where governance and also the policy frameworks we need to look at are multi-level, because and they are multi-level, and they need to account much more for the fact that without the narratives and the right messages, we will not be able to make this a societal change.
Thank you so much, Rana. And I think I totally agree with what you said. And now I saw Christian also raising his hand. Christian, you wanted to add something, but maybe that differs to what was said before.
It's very close to what Rana said, but it's it takes a different perspective. And that is, I'm getting the feeling at the moment that our society starts to block itself in the transformation. And part of that blocking is, of course, coming from the existing economic interests in fossil energy. I mean, they will struggle and fight not to lose their business. That's obvious, and it's very, very strongly feelable also in the policy arena. It's very difficult to get through with our messages because of this, because they're very well established political connections. But there is another issue that I find really worrisome, and that is the position of environmental organizations, that find all kinds of reasons to be against renewable energy, because they don't like the look, because they are afraid birds will get kicked over by windmills, or because they believe that we're going to burn all the forests for energy. Neither of this is going to be happen. We're all committed to running this in a sustainable way to make sure that we minimize the impact. But it's very easy to find, I mean, in German we say to find a hair in the soup. And that is something I find really worrisome, that you can find and you can complain about the environmental impacts of every renewable energy technology, and there are these impacts. But if you don't kind of develop a positive approach and look how to improve things rather than how to prohibit and keep from happening renewable energy, we will have a hard time.
Yes. Thank you very much. I do not see any other questions here, so I would, also looking at the time, now come to the conclusion of this webinar, and I'd say a great thank you to all our speakers, in particular to Rana from REN 21, Paolo Frankel from the IEA, and also to Ricardo Gorini from IRENA. It was great to have you all. I think that was a special opportunity also to listen to all of you in this one session. Thanks a lot for taking the time, for being available also for this small discussion that we had here. Let me mention that the webinar is not, of course, not only broadcasted live, but it will be made available, so you can watch it again if you want on YouTube, on the WWEA YouTube channel. And of course, we will share the link with you after this webinar. Now, as a very brief for the participants, I would like to just briefly launch a poll here. Those of you who want to receive more information from our organizations, please press here, and then we will forward your address to the corresponding organization so that you can receive, for example, newsletters from the organizations, and it will not share it with anyone else. Again, thank you very much to everyone, also to our REN Alliance partners. And Peter, you are still with us. Then you have the final word to say goodbye.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, well, thank you, Stefan. Thank you, everybody, for what has been an excellent session. And I just hope that we can take this further at some future date and revisit a lot of the areas to see how much further we can stretch the ideas and the ways which have been demonstrated during this past couple of hours. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Stefan, for your management of the session. And that concludes this webinar. I think we can take a vote on it, and I suggest the vote would be yes, it's been an excellent one. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.